So, welcome to Friday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm Yeka, and today we are talking about some issues which are quite near and dear to my own heart. Let me read these out for you. The Kawaii Kitty asks, my question is, if you are married and you each have different beliefs or religions and want to raise a family, which belief system do you teach them? When do you celebrate holidays? I think you should teach them both. But my husband thinks that would be too confusing for them. Any thoughts? So yes, definitely lots of thoughts. First off, I come from a mixed family in terms of my mother was a Christian, my father not so much. And also, my partner is not a pagan. So, and apologize for the drumming in the background. It's my awesome landlord, neighbor person. I tried to film earlier, but there was some cat territorial disputes going on, and they were kind of jumping up on the computer and everything. They've cut it out, but now there's the drumming, so I can't seem to get a quiet time to film. So, in terms of which belief system do you teach them, and when do you celebrate holidays? I think that's really going to depend specifically on what your values are and what your partner's values are. I think first off, finding what your mutual values are is really important, because that's going to be the foundation, probably already the foundation of your relationship if you're in a working interfaith relationship. But that's also going to be those core things that you really want to communicate to your children. Now, you also have the issues of there actually being traditions, things that you want to follow. So, again, it really comes down to discussion between the two of what's really important, what do you value. Now, for me, and I think that this may be something that other pagans share, is it's the actual cycles of nature, the wheel of the year. It's being connected with what's going on in the natural world and the world that we're part of that is important. So for me, if I'm blessed to be able to at some point have children and raise a family, what I would want is the what I called the holidays wouldn't necessarily be so important. I think it would be fun to call them by the modern 8 holidays that we have, which as a child I didn't practice. It was something that I've discovered as an adult. Our family sort of did what I'm talking about now, in terms of we had traditions that were family traditions and things that we were aware of. We were very aware of the changing of the seasons. It was because of the type of house we lived in, because of the type of people we were, and the focus that we had on being part of the world, being part of the natural world. It was very important. That's what I would want to communicate. And I think that that's most other religions. It's probably not going to be that threatening for that religion. And in many ways, if the other religion is Christianity, specifically in Catholicism, but in other forms of Christianity as well, there's already a focus. Part of that cycle is already there. I think I find living here in a predominantly Catholic area, that many of the saints' days actually correspond with the 8 holidays. You have Dia de San Juan, which is the summer solstice, or the Dia de San Isidro, which is a few days after Beltane, having the same to do with growing and that whatnot. So you'll find that there's a lot of similarities. And if you aren't, as a pagan, if you aren't super attached to the names that you're using for the holidays, you may find that they're the Christian or the Jewish or the whatever other holidays that you can celebrate together as a family, bringing those two. Now, if you wanted to do both, I don't think that would be confusing whatsoever to the child, because, for me, I've been involved. I come from a multilingual family, and I've been involved in raising a lot of multilingual children. And I see multilingualism as being something very similar to multi-faith, multi-religion, because they are different perspectives, ways of looking at the world, different ways of, to a certain extent, acting. Um, and it's really windy right now. And it tends to be that children don't have a problem distinguishing between the two. There's every now and there's issues that have to do with the individual. There's sometimes vocabulary confusions, but as a younger person, as a very small child, they usually don't tend to understand things in the same framework that we understand them. So that's just the way it is. When you're raised that way, that's the way it is. You know, this day you celebrate this, and mom tells you, or mom prays to so-and-so, and, dad has a circle of people that comes over every full moon, or whatever, or, however the family situation is. Now, framework is really important, too, to remember that as adults, the world that most of us come from, we have the framework that being different religions is a big deal. But again, if you're raised in a setting in which that isn't a big deal, in which you recognize that it's something that's different about someone from another person, then it isn't so confusing. Now, the second question, this one comes from Anna and a bunch of numbers. Do you have ideas on how to get your partner to accept your religion? My husband was raised Catholic but doesn't currently practice. I have tried to explain my beliefs to him, but he thinks anything pagan is evil. Do you have any advice? Now, when I first read this question, I interpreted it a little bit different than what I watched some of the other hosts interpret it as. And I, at first, thought that this individual was asking how to get their spouse to convert to whatever religion they were. And that really triggered and bothered me. But the other hosts interpret it more as accepting that this is what, I'm assuming she, being Anna, is believing. So this is kind of this is tough because, we only have the little bit from this tiny paragraph to go off of, but it kind of sounds like this individual has maybe come to their pagan path after having been married to their husband. And I mean, that's tough. That's really tough. So, as many of the other hosts have already suggested, trying to sit down and talk with this individual, using the I feel statements, trying to really use as non-threatening communication as possible, as, productive communication. But at a certain point, you need to look at, you might have to come to the fact that they aren't going to, no matter how much information you give them, that's not a perspective that's going to change. I mean, if they are coming from a point where their beliefs are that there is one way, there's one right, there's one true, and you're coming from a perspective that, hey, there's, from a polytheistic perspective, whether or not you're a theist or not, in that there may be many ways, and it might not be about what practices are similar for them. It might be about you believe in God or you don't. It might be something more like that. So education might not solve it, and if that's the case, then it's really painful. And you've got to really look at yourself. What are your values? What's the important part for you, and what's going to feed you and nourish you as a person? And I very strongly believe in commitment. I believe very strongly that if you commit to somebody in the form of marriage, that you should try as hard as you can, as absolutely hard as you can, to honor that. But you also have to honor yourself. So there's different directions that you can go with this. One, this is if they really are simply not going to be willing to hear what you have to say in terms of that it's, and accept that it's different, you may want to look at what are the values that you have, what about it is important, and can that still work in the framework of their religion? Can you have, or whatever you were before, can you incorporate these things that you believe and that you value and still nominally be this other thing? That's one path that you may want to take. And another path that you may want to look at, which is somewhat more painful, but to have to move on from that relationship. And so with all of that in mind, for those who have not made that commitment yet, I think, this is something to be aware of, and to really be very honest and open with your partner before marriage, before a commitment, in order to make sure that this is going to be something that works.